I knew I had cirrhosis. I just didn't want to face it. And I kept drinking. Ironically, and the dangerous thing about cirrhosis is 6 months before I was diagnosed, I got my blood tested. I had stomach pain. I went to the emergency room and I thought, I'm busted. It's going to show. Didn't show. 6 months later, I got tested. I was in there for 4 hours and they kept coming back and taking more blood and more blood and retesting and retesting. And they finally came in and said, all right, John, here's the deal. You're in complete liver failure. You keep doing what you're doing, you'll be dead in 2 months. And I said, okay, I'll stop. And I'll stop immediately. And I did. I had no insurance. I walked out of the hospital and I thought, what do I do? And my mom, who was my hero, she had an incredible battle with lymphoma. And I thought, well, if I can be half as strong as her, I'll be okay. I didn't go to rehab. I didn't do any of that. I just said, I don't want to die. So, very honestly, it was easy for me to stop. This is now 16 years later. That not wanting to die was kind of a lie. The truth was, and I literally learned it. I walk every morning. In one of my walks, I learned, I know I didn't want to die. Of course, you don't want to die. But I thought dying would hurt. And I didn't want to go through the pain of cirrhosis. I didn't want that pain. And I didn't know what the pain was, but I thought dying was painful, not only to me, but to everyone else. It was going to be painful. A year into it, I kept struggling with people. My mom's last words before she died were positive thoughts. Those were her last two words. And I tried to get in that mindset. Think positive, John, think positive. And honestly, I struggled because I thought it was all bullshit. People would say, John, positive attitude, you have positive attitude, you get healthy, you'll get healthy. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. But I bought into it a little bit. And after a year, I was a little healthier. And I thought to myself, well, am I healthier because I'm more positive? Or am I more positive because I'm healthier? And I didn't really care. I didn't care. I'm like, I just know I'm better. And the transplant world is very interesting. I was a year into it with cirrhosis, which, by the way, took me 6 months to even say the word cirrhosis out loud, alone in a room to myself. I was ashamed of that word. That word was the drunk on the corner with the brown bag. That's not me. Yeah, cirrhosis is you, John. You have cirrhosis and struggled to accept that disease. It took me 2 years to get in front of a team of doctors. And I did at Penn in Philadelphia, which, if I can make a plug, to me, they're the best in the world. And I sat in front of 12 doctors, and Dr. Shaked, who I owe my life to, said to me, so, John, you messed up your liver. Why should we give you one? And I spoke in a passion I never knew I had. And I'll never forget this. I guaranteed him I was going to make it to that table. And I said, Dr. Shaked, after that, it's your turn. You got to do the rest. And just as a side note to that, fast forward 12 years, I'm outside the operating room on the stretcher, and he comes by. And I said, Dr. Shaked, you remember what I said? I saw him 4 times in 12 years. And he goes, yeah, John, I remember. It's my turn now. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be easy. So, and ironically, when I was on the operating room table, it's a very interesting environment. The team is all in there. The rock stars are the surgeons. They're not in the room. They come in after you're under anesthesia. And they're like, hey, John, what do you want to hear? What do you want to hear? What music? And I said, Bruce Springsteen, I want to hear Thunder Road. And literally the entire team is singing Thunder Road with me. That ended. And then they said, what next? And I said, Born to Run. And I broke down and started crying because I realized that, oh my God, this is what I heard. This is the start of it. This is what I thought when I was really in a dark place in my youth. And it was incredible. And by the end of the song, I was under. So, the path to transplant, if there's one thing I'd like to leave your audience with, is you don't want to go through what I did. The medical consequences of alcohol abuse, you have no idea. No idea. I'll start with I had my transplant. I'm good. I'm healthy. I'm going tomorrow. This is 3 years later. I'm going tomorrow for my MRI and CT scan because they found cancer when they took out my liver. And they think they got it all. So I have to get tested every 3 months for 5 years. And Simon, the month of July was hell for me because all I did was worry about it. And I do try to have the positive attitude, but I worry. I worry about it. I'm so lucky, through the course of the road to transplant, 2 strokes. One, I was on life support for 5 days, never knowing if I was going to wake up or not. One of the things that caused the stroke, in addition to alcohol, was my parents' divorce was very ugly. Well, my father remarried twice, and his third wife wrote me out of the will. And I was the one who was there for him. All I wanted was my father's medical records. That's all I wanted, which, by the way, he was diagnosed with alcoholic dementia. In his later years, he succumbed to the bottle. I never got those records. The judge promised me, and I felt so violated. And my brothers and sisters, they didn't support me in that. And I drove home and I was so upset about it. The next day, I had my stroke. And that was an incredible experience. My wife found me laying in a pool of blood. I was there for 5 hours and flown to the hospital. And again, 5 days later, I woke up. At least a dozen surgeries. Do you know what cirrhosis is?
Well, I'm going to ask that because it's bandied around. We've heard of it, but I'd love for you to describe it because you talk around like the different physical aspects. And the reason why I didn't say anything is because sometimes you just got to hear a story in its entirety and really reflect on that. And you have such a story, and our stories can go over decades as well. So it's really important to hear these things in context. But the one key thing is, what is cirrhosis? Tell us what that is and what it felt like for you.
Well, first, I'll show you cirrhosis.
Oh, wow.
That is my liver.
Wow.
What cirrhosis is scar tissue. Blood can't go through scars. So Dr. Reddy told me there's something called sinusoids, and they're little pathways. And there's the portal vein and the hepatic vein. And what tips is they put a stent to connect the two so blood can go through. And the other part of cirrhosis is since the blood can't go through the liver as well as it should, the cells are squeezed. And this is the patient's perspective. The cells are squeezed and the fluid is squeezed out of the cells so the blood can go through. Well, that fluid accumulates. I was having 20 liters of fluid taken out every week. I looked pregnant, and they drain it. And what's also drained is the protein from your body. So then after that's done, you are exhausted beyond belief. And I made a promise to myself that I always parked farthest away and I would walk to my car every time. And I had 4,000 pounds of fluid drained from my body. Wow. And yes, that number is correct. 4,000 pounds.
So what were some of the other symptoms that you were experiencing prior to the transplant? Like, what did it feel like to have cirrhosis of the liver?
Oh, too much information for you here, but you're exhausted. Well, when I had to pee, I sat down because I had to rest. And the ironic thing is, the first time after my transplant, I stood up peeing. I was like, what's going on here? I was like, what? I haven't done this in years. And that's one of the things. The other part of it is it's really tough because your days and nights get mixed up. You don't sleep at night. That is really tough to deal with because you have to work and you're not sleeping all night and then you got to go to work. But one of the this is the scariest thing I'd say. There's something called hepatic encephalopathy. Are you familiar with what that is?
Yeah, describe it for us.
Okay. What you have to do to literally stay sane, and I mean that, you're on a laxative called lactulose. You have to poop 3 times a day. You have to get the toxins out of your body, because if the toxins don't leave your body, they go to your brain. And one time, a dear friend of mine, her daughter was pregnant and delivered their baby. I didn't take my lactulose for 30 hours. And after that, I drove about 7 hours for work. And I remember driving. All I remember is trucks were honking their horn at me loud. I didn't know why. And the next day, I'm driving somewhere, and a friend of mine calls me and notices something's wrong. And I'm like, Karen, you worry. She said, John, there's something wrong with you. You're not yourself. I'm like, I'm just frustrated because I can't read my GPS. She's like, what? I'm like, I can't read it. Something's wrong. And she said, no, John, something's wrong. I'm calling your brother. And I'm like, okay. She goes, well, give me his number. And I'm going through my phone. She goes, John, give me your brother's number. I'm still going through my phone. She goes, John, what's your brother's name? I don't know. John, what's your name? I don't know. She's like, oh my God, tell me what you see. And luckily, I was right by an exit that had a pharmacy. And she somehow called my doctor. She knew who my doctor was, told them the pharmacy. I told her the exit and the pharmacy, and they got me lactulose. And I took a big dose of it and went right away, and I was fine. But I had hepatic encephalopathy twice in my wait for transplant. The second time, I was talking to my sister, and Abraham Lincoln came knocking on my door. And she's like, what? I'm like, Abe's here. Yeah, he's here. He's got his hat on and everything. She's like, John, there's something wrong. I'm like, no, there's not. You hallucinate. You hallucinate because the toxins, they go to your brain, and you can't mess with that. And the lactulose, by the way, tastes horrible. It is the worst tasting medicine you ever had. And you have no choice, but you have to take it. So, that's a problem. And you sit there and thinking, really, the drinking was worth it, huh? Another thing that it does is you have no strength. I played basketball when I had cirrhosis. I couldn't reach the basket on a free throw, couldn't reach it. Your strength is all taken away from you. Albumin is the main protein in the liver, and it's gone. It's gone. Forget it. So your strength is gone, sex drive gone. I mean, your thoughts, your sleep, your motivation, everything. And by the way, you don't really have a lot of support because you drank all the support away. So that's pretty tough.